This codex review is covering the units of the Adepta Sororitas or Sisters of Battle. Unlike the previous videos, I do not actually own this army myself. However, I've taken into consideration all the stratagems and different orders that you can take and made the star ratings based off of a mixture of my opinion and some good old-fashioned maths. I'm sure there's still plenty to be learned from this video and hopefully can help you build a Sisters of Battle army once they finish releasing the models. Let's quickly go over the star ratings before we begin. A 1-star unit is just bad overall. They don't have any situational tech play that can make them effective and just generally aren't worth the points they are to take them on the table. 2 stars is situational. You can find use out of them if you bring a specific set of things to support them or you invest a lot of points into them, but generally there are things that do their job but better. 3 stars are decent in casual play. You can pretty much slot them into any list and they won't negatively impact your army. A 4-star is a competitive tech choice. They usually will be slotted into good lists and will generally do the job better than units in 3 stars. 5 stars is for strong competitive choices, which you'll find in pretty much every army, regardless of the skill level you're playing at. Firstly, we have, in the 1-star category, the Triumph or St. Catherine. When talking about models that are pretty much only good on your shelf, this is pretty much the poster child of it. The Triumph of Catherine is just generally a big target on the board. Their high amount of wounds means that they can be targeted even if they aren't the closest unit, despite being a character. They do have a 4-up invuln save and a -1 to hit to try and compensate for that. They still become such a large focus fire, especially at 200 points, that they'll just get obliterated off the table despite this tankiness bonus. The other downsides include that it can't be carried in a transport to be kept safe. The relics that you can take along it aren't that good. Well, there's only 2 of them that are really good and 1 situationally useful. While they don't follow any order, which means that you can include them in any army, at their massive points cost of 185, it's going to be incredibly difficult to be able to slot them into any list. Sharing the 1-star category is the Penitent Engines, which are just massively outclassed by the new Mortifiers. They have a slightly better feel no pain, and they can reroll hits after charging, but their weapon skill still isn't great, their save is terrible, and in general, they're just going to get killed before they can do anything useful. They additionally can't take any order keywords because they are not Adepta Sororitas units. This means you can't benefit from any of the orders, of which there are some pretty good ones. Moving on into 2 stars, we have the Gemini Superior. They're cheap-ish elite slot filler if you don't have Celestine, but you really need Celestine to make them effective, which isn't that much of a problem. If Celestine were really strong, I'd probably rate these guys higher. The Gemini Superior can't really take any good weapons to make use out of their 3-up weapon skill and ballistic skill. They aren't tanky enough to really take the brunt of the force of lots of people shooting at them. And while Celestine is improving their 6-up invuln save to a 4-up invuln save, I don't think it's enough to really save them from being gunned down. Next up in the 2-star category is going to be a controversial pick again, I know. It's going to be the Immolator. I feel like this is quite similar to the Hellhound. It does have transport capacity, but it's only for Ministorum and non-Sisters of Battle models. It's very weird considering that you probably want to be transporting some Sisters of Battle models around. The only thing that I can think that you'd want to be transporting that's only Ministorum is the Crusaders. I feel like I'm going to get flack for this like I did with the Hellhound and say it's good for shooting down flyers, and admittedly the Sisters don't actually have any anti-air specific units like the Guard do, but the Immolator is just a big target without the ability to protect itself from being blown up. And finally in the 2-star category is the Sororitas Rhino. Now this is much closer to the 3-star category than the Immolator and the Gemini Superior are, because you probably want to be using this to transport Crusaders around, which is a good option. The real question is, why is the Sororitas Rhino unable to carry Sisters of Battle? Hello, this is Grueman during editing. I would like to point out that I cannot read and that Sisters of Battle unit can in fact get inside of Rhinos and Immolators, assuming that they have the order keyword. This does significantly improve the Rhino and makes it as high as 3 stars. I'm sorry for confusing any of you with my inability to read. I haven't quite figured that one out. It is reasonably tanky with its toughness 7 and its 3-up save, but it's still probably going to get focus fire down, and seeing as itself can't whack back that hard, I don't think it's worth bringing usually. Moving on to 3 stars, we start with Arcoflagellants. They have high strength for a Sisters of Battle unit, which is very nice. They also have the potential to have a lot of attacks per model, but they tend to die quite easily before they could get into melee, and at 13 points a pop, it's quite expensive to see them go splat. They don't get the Shield of Faithful as they're not a Sisters of Battle unit, and the only thing to really make up for their lack of save is a 5-up Feel No Pain. They'll probably get gunned down before they can do anything effective, and they don't have enough support to make them really good. The reroll of the hit roll does somewhat make up for their 4-up weapon skill, pushing it closer to a 3-up once you do the maths, which is why I think they're a decent 3-star unit. Especially with their decent mobility, they can get into combat somewhat reliably. Next up we have Crusaders in 3 stars. They've actually cropped up again since the Guard list. This isn't quite a revision, it's more of the fact that Crusaders do better in an Adepta Sororitas army than they do in a Guard army. Guard have the option of Bullgrins and generally have a better firing line as they're longer range than the Sisters of Battle, whereas Crusaders can soak up a lot of damage with their 3-up invuln saves and can get into melee. While they still can't benefit from the order traits, the general support in the Adepta Sororitas Codex is better for the Crusaders than it is for in the Guard Codex. They're relatively cheap for how tanky they are, and their main weakness is their low strength, being unable to really effectively damage things like Marines, which is the main thing that's holding the Sisters of Battle back. And the only super vulnerability they have is to mortal wounds, which you usually won't have being spammed on your Crusaders anyway. Next up we have the Death Cult Assassins. They are the midpoint between the Crusaders and the Archofragilants. The 3 units are quite similar, and they're just different levels of tankiness versus damage. They're not really much better than either of them, but you can carry them in a Rhino like the other 2, and they can do some damage when they get into melee. Next up, we have Celestine. Celestine is good because she can be fit into pretty much any Sister Battle army as she doesn't require a specific keyword to be included. She's also incredibly hard to kill with the ability to get back up on a 2-up, and she improves the invuln save of nearby sisters. However, she's in a very awkward spot. She is not tanky enough to just be able to soak up shots. She can still die relatively easily, and she doesn't really have the firepower to make up for her points cost. I mean, she's still decent because of the buff, but I think there's better options to put in your HQ slot. Next up in the 3-star category is the Diologus. The main good thing about the Diologus is she has one of the best abilities from the Triumphs of St. Catherine and can be protected unlike St. Catherine. The only downside really is I think there's better options, 1 in the elite slot and 2 for 35 points that you can take in the Sisters of Battle than the ability to add 1 to some dice rolls. Furthermore, the +1 to leadership is basically irrelevant. Next up is the Dominion Squad. They're a pretty standard special weapons squad, which is why it's a bit weird that they're included in the fast attack slot. Regardless, they're only 1 point more than the Sisters of Battle and can take a full squad of special weapons, if you have them in their minimum size. They can also do a vanguard movement at the start of the game, which is useful for taking board control early on, and considering the fact the Sisters of Battle is such a short range army, the ability to close the gap is very important. The only really good special weapon is the Melter Gun, and with a 12-inch range it's going to be hard to get it into a point where it can be useful. The Storm Bolters are okay, but considering the fact that you can't use Bolter Discipline like the Marines can, it's going to be difficult to get the volume of fire that you want out of it. I will note, however, that there is a stratagem that makes them significantly more effective that gives them -2 AP and also adds 1 more damage, which means you could be ripping through infantry reasonably effectively. The only problem is you need to use the stratagem to make it effective. Next up is the Seraphim Squads. The big advantage of this thing is Deep Strike. Being able to get board control on turns 2 and turn 3 is very, very useful. The Seraphims get 3 different weapon choices, which you can make decent use out of. They have the option of 2 bolt pistols, 2 strength 3 hand flamers, or 2 hand melters. They do have an extra 1 to their invuln saves that makes them slightly tankier, but that's not too important, seeing as you're going to be shooting them around the board, picking off things from objectives. Furthermore, they have a stratagem that allows them to actually shoot as soon as they come down from Deep Strike, because usually they'd have to deploy outside the range of their weapons. This is why if you were to take them, I'd suggest you only take 1 or 2 squads, and ensure that you can use the stratagem every time you deploy them. The hand melters are good at clearing off a tank, and the hand flamers are okay at taking out things like guardsmen or cultists. However, I feel like there's slightly better options for taking out tanks that can either do it at a longer range or can do it more reliably. And for the flamers, they're only strength 3, which is kind of weak. I will say that with Bloody Rose, the -1 AP can actually help quite a bit for the non-melter weapons. I will also note that only 2 of the squad can actually take either hand flamers or melters, and the rest are stuck with bolt pistols, although the leader can take a plasma pistol and a power sword, which is good for when they inevitably get charged due to their short range. Next up is the Exorcist. The Exorcist has really powerful long-range weapons and a good toughness. What's the downside? The big problem with the Exorcist is that it has heavy weapons. Heavy weapons usually aren't that big of a deal, seeing as most units that carry them have ways of mitigating them, either through being titanic and ignoring the -1 to hit, or being able to target things they cannot see. The Exorcist gets neither of these, so while the 3-up ballistic skill looks really nice, most of the time it's going to be hitting on a 4-up. And while the Exorcist missile launcher is one of the Sisters of Battle's few good anti-tank options, I feel like when it's hitting on a 4-up, you're better off trying to find ways of getting melters in range in order to blow tanks up. Finally, in 3 stars, we have Mortifiers. They completely outclass the Penitent Engines with having a 3-up in both their weapon skill and ballistic skill. However, it doesn't quite break it into 4 or 5 stars due to the fact that it's quite a large target and it doesn't have any invuln saves or high enough toughness to back it up. While it can mince things up once it gets into melee, it needs to get into melee first. I will say, however, that if it does die in melee, it has a better explode than most things, seeing as it cannot hurt allies. The other nice thing is if they don't make it into melee, they still have a reasonably good shooting ability, being able to shoot their heavy bolters like assault weapons or their flamers like pistols. Now we finally get to move on to 4 stars. We'll start with the Repentia Superior. Her main advantage is that she makes Sisters Repentia better. She also has the ability to kill lower leadership things, although the things that can be hit by it are basically conscripts, cultists and grots, which you're usually not too worried about killing anyway. She doesn't take up a slot herself, which is nice because the elite slot is very competitive for Sisters of Battle. Her main weakness is her low strength, which is the weakness of the majority of the Sisters of Battle melee units, which is a problem considering how close range most of the Sisters of Battle are. Next up in 4 stars is Junith Eruita. She has lots of wounds for her character, but not so much that it pushes her over the point where she can be targeted. She has really strong buffs. Furthermore, her melee actually improves her strength, which means she's a formidable melee combatant. She has a good save, a good invuln save, and just all around a good character. The main downside is that she's quite expensive, which is the problem for pretty much every character. And she doesn't really make for a great warlord of your army. Next up in 4 stars is Missionaries and Preachers. The advantages are they give +1 to your attacks, which is really good for Sisters of Battle, which is an army that has a lot of melee focused things. Furthermore, Missionaries are pretty much the only thing other than Canonesses which can be used in HQ slots, which is a fairly big restriction for Sisters of Battle considering the rule of 3 that applies for most competitive games. Downsides are they're reasonably squishy for a HQ, they don't get a benefit off of order traits, and they also don't really have a great weapon skill themselves. You can only take 1 missionary per detachment, and Preachers take up elite slots, which is something you value a lot as Sisters of Battle. They're also relatively squishy for a unit that wants to be getting close into melee, although the 4-up invuln save does help them quite a lot. Next up in the 4-star category is the Hospitaller. This may be slightly more because of the healers that I use in the armies that I do play, have really situational and kind of weak healers. She's a good healer that gives guaranteed wounds back for 35 points. Furthermore, if you are looking for elite slots to fill, which is not really common for Sisters of Battle, but if you are, she's relatively cheap for it, and she only needs to revive 4 Battle Sisters to pay for herself. Although to be fair, if you want to make better use out of her, you'll probably be reviving something that's carrying significantly better weapons, like Retributor squads with multi-melters. Next up is the Sisters Repentia. They have good strength, which is what Sisters need, and Sisters Repentia gets ×2 on their strength, which is really good. They have good AP, good damage, and really good synergy with our Martyred Lady because of the amount of miracle dice you're getting. They're reasonably squishy, much like the Arcoflagellants, however they do get support from the Repentia Superior. The other downside is they're quite a risky unit, and you might not end up killing anything with them, and considering their points cost, that's quite risky. Next up in 4 stars is the Zephyrim Squad. They, much like the Seraphim Squad, have very good mobility and deep strike. The thing that makes them better is they can actually make better use out of the deep strike. They have decent melee weapons, as in they all carry power swords, and they can reroll charges and wounds. Rerolling all wounds is slightly better than adding 1 to the wounds, so when they're hitting something of toughness 4, they're essentially hitting it on a 4-up rather than a 5-up. Furthermore, much like Sephirim's, they have +1 to their invuln save, which applies both in melee and in range, which is quite nice. And when they actually get support from something like an Imager Fire, their strength is somewhat negated. These are probably one of the best marine killers you can get in the army. The big downside is, of course, that they're 17 points per model, and getting something like an Imager Fire to support them is sometimes quite difficult. Finally, in 4 stars, we have Retributors. Now, I know we're going to get a lot of complaints about Exorcists versus Retributors, and I did a whole bunch of maths on how effective they are per point, and the Retributors slightly edged out the Exorcist. Now, I also think the Retributors have better support. So first of all, you can be slightly more mobile with the Retributors and not suffer the penalties for firing your heavy weapons. Furthermore, you can revive them back with the Hospitaller, and finally you have a stratagem to make up for the multi-melters lacking range. I will however admit the multi-melters are probably overcosted considering the fact they are still a melter gun, except you can't advance with them, and the only benefit you get is an extra 12 inches, for nearly double the points cost. You can also take Retributors with heavy flamers, which get an extra 4 inches, and they can also take heavy bolters, which are okay. You can get +1 to hit with them with the stratagem, but there's better options out there. The big downside of them, too, of course, is that they are a very squishy chassis, so you'll need protection and things to bring them back. They also fill up the heavy support slot if you're looking to build a brigade. You can equip them just bolters if you want to do that. Finally, in 5 stars, we start with the Canoness. The Canoness is versatile, she's strong, she's tough, and she's basically your only HQ option, so you're going to be taking a lot of them. They have a very good aura, admittedly, with the Space Marine Captain effect, being able to reroll hit rolls of 1, and a decent selection of weapons. The only slight downside I'd say is since we've lost a lot of the Legends options, she's relatively short-ranged. Of course, if you can kit her out properly, you can make good use out of the short range, giving her lots of effective melee weapons, especially if you're taking Bloody Rose, and giving her good pistol weapons like a Plasma Pistol and an Inferno Pistol. Next up in 5 stars is your standard Battle Sister squad. I wouldn't say the Battle Sisters are the best of the troops choices out there, however, seeing as they are the only troops choice and the Sisters of Battle really want command points, they do the job reasonably well. You can kit them out relatively cheaply and get a 45-point squad, which, while isn't as cheap as, say, a Guardsman squad or a Skitarii squad, you can still do a lot of damage with them. The big problem with the Sisters in general is that they have the toughness 3 and no bolter discipline, which means they neither have a great amount of damage output nor really a ton of toughness to be able to survive high strength shots. The 3-up save is super nice, and there's lots of ways to improve their 6-up invuln save, so you can make them reasonably tanky to make up for their low toughness, but you can get a lot more damage output out of either, say, boys with stronger melee, or Space Marines with things like Bolter Discipline and the extra AP they get from their combat doctrines. Furthermore, they don't really get a ton of melee options. The upside to that, I guess, is you can fill out lots of cheap and reasonably tough sisters inside the squad and have the Sister Superior be reasonably effective. The sisters are generally quite versatile. You can take a heavy or special weapon and another special weapon, but the main differences will be in your Sister Superior. Essentially, the Battle Sisters can't put out a ton of damage on their own, however they are good support for the rest of the army. Next up in the 5 stars, probably the most interesting of all the options, is the Celestian Squad. They have almost the same stat line as the Battle Sister Squad, however they do get +1 to their weapon skill, which can be good if you kit out your superior with melee weapons. Aside from that, they are basically the same as a Battle Sister Squad for 1 more point. So, why are they in 5 stars? Well, it's hidden in the many abilities they have below. First of all, they are a bodyguard in a unit that can take lots of models. This means that if you give them support with, say, the Hospitaller, or just generally keep them tight around a Canoness, they're going to be able to keep them very well protected. Furthermore, you get full rerolls if you're nearby a Canoness. This is really important. A full reroll is really good, and it essentially is better than adding 1 to the ballistic skill, mathematically. You can give them a variety of weapons much like the Battle Sister Squad, and they can even make better use out of the melee due to their +1 weapon skill. The only downside is you can't fully kit them out with special or heavy weapons, which you can do in the other specialized squads, but the rerolls to hits I think is so good that they are genuinely worth taking as many as you can. Finally, rounding off the whole list is the Imagifier. The Imagifier is great as it is what solidifies your melee units. Giving +1 to strength is pretty much what every melee sisters unit is looking for. This means that you probably want to dot 1 or 2 Imagifiers throughout your army in order to improve the melee where possible. Of course, if you aren't looking to build a melee sisters army, or an army that will eventually get into melee, you can always include them for the ignoring -1 AP, which is quite good considering the fact the sisters are probably going to be shot at by a lot of things with high volume of shots and low AP. Things like autocannons and the like. The aura isn't huge, however it can be buffed by the Book of St. Lucius to be an extra 3 inches. And honestly, this is worth doing, seeing as you're going to be wanting to keep your Imagifiers as alive as possible to give this amazing buff out. Additionally, there's a stratagem that allows you to take 2 auras, only for 1 Imagifier admittedly. It means you can hand out both the buffs of +1 strength and the ignoring -1 AP, which is really good for your infantry, which you're going to be having a lot of. The Deny the Witch reroll thing is basically irrelevant. There's a warlord trait out there that allows you to have a better Deny the Witch, but in general, you have enough stuff out there to be able to kill Psychers as Sisters of Battle that you're not going to be super concerned about re-rolling the Deny the Witch tests. I forgot about the Battle Sanctum. The Battle Sanctum is 1 star. You're paying 50 points to gain 1 miracle dice every turn, and also add 1 to the leadership of some models. It's far too situational and requires your army to be far too stationary in order to make use out of it. The -1 to leadership only affects chaos, and you can't always guarantee you're going to come up against chaos, and while it's nice to be able to plonk down some terrain that may be advantageous to you, it's not worth spending 50 points to do so. If you require additional miracle dice, you should perhaps consider spending them on Sisters Repentia, which can do stuff before they die as well. Alright, that's everything in the Sisters of Battle Codex. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this review. I've been listening to all the feedback and reading all the comments, and I've been loving hearing your input. Feel free to leave comments down below, and give me a like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video. Alright, thanks for watching.